Let's do this thing. All right. Hey guys, it's Karalynn and welcome back to the podcast where we talk about all things legal in the construction industry. Today we're going to read another chapter from my new book, Trust Your Gut. Today is chapter 4, Scope of Work. So it's my free Audible version. You just have to listen one episode at a time. All right. Scope of work. Many contractors I've worked with rely solely on a scope of work, thinking that it is the same as having a contract. Newsflash, they're not synonymous. A contract should encompass much more than just a scope of work. While the scope of work is a critical component, a comprehensive contract includes various provisions to ensure clarity and protect all the parties involved, which I detail with each chapter of this book. While I applaud my clients for at least having a scope of work as their contract, clarity is often missing, and that got them into trouble. For some, their scope of work wasn't detailed enough, leading to misunderstandings and disputes. For others, it wasn't clear, and the homeowner expected more than what was agreed upon. In this chapter, we'll dive into what your scope of work should really look like. We'll explore how to make it comprehensive and clear, ensuring that it protects you and sets the right expectations for your clients. If only my client Jake had understood this. A costly oversight. In the sun-drenched heart of California, Jake, a diligent pool contractor, embarked on a project. The homeowner, Mr. Lawson, envisioned a seamless connection between his new pool and his existing concrete sidewalk. Unfortunately, Jake's scope of work didn't include this crucial detail. As the pool took shape, Mrs. Lawson raised an eyebrow. "Where's the sidewalk connection?" she asked. Jake hesitated, then confused. "It wasn't in the original scope." Mrs. Lawson's eye narrowed. "What do you mean?" "But they have to connect. It doesn't make any sense if they don't connect." She was right. Jake weighed his options. Lawsuits loomed like storm clouds, especially in California. So he made a choice. He bridged the gap, poured the concrete, and ensured continuity. Mrs. Lawson smiled, blissfully aware of Jake's sacrifice. While avoiding being sued, the oversight in his scope of work cost him $10,000, which sadly was more than he had made on the job. Scope of work. The scope of work is arguably the most important part of a residential construction contract. Without it, how would you know what to do? What does the homeowner want? How would you price the project? You can't answer these questions until you know what the job entails. When creating the scope of work, the level of detail matters significantly. Some contractors opt for a high-level approach, providing a lump sum price for the entire project. "I'll remodel your kitchen for X price." A much more effective, transparent approach is itemizing the work. Instead of merely stating an overall cost, I recommend breaking down the project into specific components. Let's take a kitchen remodel, for example. An itemized list would include details like cabinet installation, countertop materials, flooring, plumbing fixtures, electrical work, and so on. By doing this, you offer clarity to both parties, yourself and to your client. This transparency fosters trust, minimizes misunderstanding, and ensures everyone is on the same page regarding what's included in the project. Are you sensing the theme here? It's all about setting those expectations. When creating a scope of work, be as clear as possible. Pretend you're explaining the job details to a child who knows nothing about construction. The clearer you are, the better it will set expectations for the homeowner. Remember, homeowners have no frame of reference when it comes to the construction process and how homes are built. This is your chance to show them your expertise and offer an experience that is clear from the get-go. If you don't have a scope of work and you get into a dispute, a judge or jury will likely decide what your scope of work was. And that's a very expensive fight. If a potential client comes to me wanting to sue, but they don't have a scope of work, I won't take the case because it's unlikely that we will succeed. When it comes to disputes in court without a scope of work, the matter becomes he said, she said, relying solely on testimony. If your case reaches trial, the central question becomes who seems more trustworthy. This judgment rarely reflects the actual quality of the work done. Instead, it centers on your character. Factors like how you communicate, your likability, and even how you dress can influence a judge or jury's perception. More often than not, judges and juries lean towards homeowners, find it easier to empathize with them than with contractors. So in court, without a well-defined scope of work, it becomes a battle of credibility, deciding who is more believable based on the subjective factors. Another thing I often hear clients complain about is not getting paid for the work they've completed. I did this work and I didn't get paid. Was it in your scope of work? I always ask. Well, no, it was extra, and I did it during the job. I hate when they give this answer. I can't really help you, bud. If the work wasn't clearly listed in your contract, you're shit out of luck. If you complete work outside the agreed upon scope of work, you're not entitled to get paid for said work. If your client asks you to change anything outside the agreed upon scope of work, you must submit a change order in order to get paid. More on this in the next chapter. And lastly, it is important to specify what is not included in your scope of work. For example, if you're remodeling a kitchen, make it clear that the bathroom is not included. In the scope of work, always include a line that states anything not specifically included above is excluded. This will cover and ensure there's no misunderstandings. A project lost after permitting. A client of mine, we'll call him Albert, ran a construction company focused on backyard and front porch projects. His client, Mr. Morris, wanted a backyard oasis, a pool, a deck, a pergola where laughter would echo. Albert listened, nodding, as Mr. Morris's excitement spilled out across the blueprint. They methodically laid out the scope of work, and after hours of putting the contract in place and explaining the details, they both signed. Before Albert's crew could get to work, they applied for the necessary permits. Albert submitted the blueprints, and now they had to wait. Days stretched into weeks, and the phone stayed silent. No green light meant no shovel hitting the soil. Then a letter arrived. The municipality's verdict. Changes were mandatory. The pool's depths violated safety codes. The deck encroached on an easement. Albert's heart sank. The extra cost after changing the scope of work, an extra $50,000, a sum that mocked the original budget. He met Mr. Morris. The blueprint spread across the same kitchen table. We've hit a snag, Albert said, his voice apologetic. The changes mean more work and more materials. Mr. Morris's face fell. But I can't afford this. Albert understood, but he couldn't help feeling defeated. He'd put in countless hours up until this point. Unfortunately, the pool remained a blueprint. Mr. Morris couldn't move forward. Albert considered legal battles, the signed contract, the fine print, but he didn't. He swallowed the pill and moved on. Permits first. If you're working on a project that requires a permit, you should require a design contract that goes through permitting before you put together a build contract. If you think about it, this is common sense. You won't know the exact scope of work until the permit is approved. I briefly mentioned this approach in Chapter 2 and highlighted how this dual-step process helps you get to know the client before embarking on a larger term build process. I also mentioned a design contract ensures fair compensation for the time it takes to submit necessary paperwork for permitting. This design process allows you to get paid for the crucial part of any build, nothing too outrageous, but enough to cover the back and forth with the designer and multiple applications to get the project approved through permitting. I've seen clients charge a flat fee of between $1,500 and $3,000 for their design contract, which is totally reasonable. If Albert had charged Mr. Morris for the design contract first, not only would the permitting process accurately depict what the scope of work would be, he could have also been paid for the time he spent gathering information and submitting paperwork for those permits. Albert's experience highlights how a separate design contract is crucial. It doesn't have to be complicated either. I view it as a mini contract before the physical part of the project starts. It should only be a few pages highlighting the scope of work during this stage, working with the designer to submit the proper paperwork for the permitting process. Be sure to set those expectations. There's that theme again. I've had clients get fired because the permitting process took 6 months as opposed to the 90 days depicted in their contract. Builders are not designers. We have no control over how long municipalities will take with their permitting. Being upfront and setting expectations about how you're not in control of the permitting process is part of covering your ass. And lastly, I also pointed out in Chapter 2, this process lets you test out working with the homeowner. You will have worked enough with this client to see if he's a good fit. If you don't get along, you can simply turn over the entire project over to him and they can hire somebody else. Key takeaways. Without a scope of work, you don't know what's included in the project and what's not. During a dispute in court, if you don't have a scope of work, a judge or a jury will decide what it was for you, which is a position you never want to be in. You're not entitled to get paid for work that's not included in your scope of work. And don't work for free. Require a design contract in your process before you get to a build contract. This should be a non-negotiable with projects that require a permit. The blueprint for success. A well-defined scope of work is your blueprint for success. It not only guides the project, but also protects you from potential disputes, misunderstandings, and unpaid work. It's about more than just spelling out the details. It's about setting expectations, ensuring clarity, and establishing trust from the outset. By taking the time to create a detailed scope of work, you're not just avoiding headaches, you're positioning yourself as a professional who values transparency, and fairness. Even if the scope of work might look perfect, construction isn't a perfect world. Things are bound to change, and that's okay. You've got a process in place to handle it, which is the focus of our next chapter.